Lisa never thought she'd be back in her hometown. After 15 years of city life, she found herself driving down the familiar country roads, with a U-Haul trailer bouncing behind her car. Her grandmother's house was waiting for her, along with memories she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The old woman had passed away 3 months ago, leaving Lisa the only thing she had left, a small house on 2 acres of land. Lisa's parents had suggested selling it right away. "You don't need the headache," her mother had said over the phone. "That place is too much work for someone like you." But Lisa couldn't bring herself to sell. Maybe it was guilt for not visiting more often, or maybe it was the way her grandmother's voice seemed to echo in her mind, telling stories about the garden she'd planted behind the house. Either way, Lisa had quit her marketing job, packed up her apartment, and decided to give small-town life a try. The house looked smaller than she remembered. The white paint was peeling and the front porch sagged slightly on one side. But the bones were good and the big windows still let in plenty of light. Lisa pulled into the gravel driveway and sat in her car for a moment, looking at what was now her home. She'd been there about an hour, carrying boxes from the trailer, when she heard voices coming from the backyard. Curious, Lisa walked around the side of the house and stopped dead in her tracks. There were cars parked all over her grandmother's old vegetable garden. Not just 1 or 2 cars, but at least 8 vehicles scattered across the grass where tomatoes and beans used to grow. A group of well-dressed people stood near the cars, chatting and laughing. They all seemed to know each other, and they were clearly comfortable being there. Lisa watched from behind her grandmother's old apple tree, trying to figure out what was going on. "Excuse me," she finally called out, walking toward the group. "Can I help you with something?" The conversation stopped and everyone turned to look at her. A tall man in an expensive-looking golf shirt stepped forward. He had the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be the new owner," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert, president of the Willowbrook Heights HOA. We heard about Mrs. Chen passing away. She was a lovely woman." Lisa shook his hand, still confused. "Thank you. But I'm wondering why everyone's parked in my backyard." Robert's smile stayed in place, but Lisa caught something that looked like annoyance flash across his face. "Oh, this? We've been using this space for overflow parking during our community events for years. Your grandmother never minded. We're having our monthly social gathering today." Lisa looked around at the deep tire tracks carved into what had once been carefully tended soil. "My grandmother let you park here?" "Of course," Robert said, his voice taking on a slightly condescending tone. "It's been an arrangement for almost 10 years now. The community center parking fills up during our events, so we use this area. It's never been a problem." Several other HOA members nodded in agreement. A woman in designer sunglasses spoke up. Mrs. Chen was so understanding about community cooperation. She knew how important these gatherings are for neighborhood unity. Lisa felt a knot forming in her stomach. She remembered her grandmother as someone who valued her privacy and took great pride in her garden. It was hard to imagine her willingly letting cars destroy the space where she'd grown her prize-winning roses. "Well," Lisa said carefully, "I appreciate that my grandmother may have allowed this in the past, but I'd prefer if you didn't park here anymore. I'm planning to restore the garden." The smile disappeared from Robert's face completely. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. This has been a long-standing community arrangement. You can't just change things because you're new." "But it's my property," Lisa said, feeling her cheeks getting warm. "I have every right to decide how it's used." Robert stepped closer, and Lisa noticed that the other HOA members had formed a loose circle around her. "Listen, I can see you're not familiar with how things work in a close-knit community like this. We all have to give a little to get along. Your grandmother understood that." "What exactly are you saying?" Lisa asked. "I'm saying that making waves isn't a good way to start your time here," Robert replied. His voice was still friendly, but there was something cold underneath it. "We're reasonable people, but we don't appreciate newcomers trying to disrupt established arrangements. These kinds of conflicts have a way of making life difficult." Lisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Are you threatening me?" Robert laughed, but it sounded forced. "Threatening? Of course not. I'm just explaining how things work. We're all neighbors here, and neighbors help each other out. Right now, you're the one choosing not to be helpful." The woman in sunglasses nodded. "Robert's right. We're just trying to maintain the friendly community spirit that made this neighborhood so special." "Your grandmother was part of that spirit." Lisa looked around at the faces surrounding her. They all wore expressions of polite concern, but she could see something harder underneath. These people were used to getting their way and they didn't appreciate being told no. "I need some time to think about this," Lisa said finally. "Of course," Robert said, his fake smile returning. "Take all the time you need. But I hope you'll remember that we're the ones who'll be living next to you for years to come. It's always better when everyone gets along." The group started moving toward their cars, and Lisa watched as they carefully backed out of her yard, leaving fresh ruts in the soft ground. Robert was the last to leave. He rolled down his window as he passed her. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said. "I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot more of each other." After they were gone, Lisa stood alone in her backyard looking at the damage. The tire tracks crisscrossed through what had once been neat rows of vegetables. Broken sprinkler heads stuck up from the ground like tiny grave markers. In one corner, she could see the remains of her grandmother's rose bushes, crushed under the weight of someone's SUV. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Mom, did Grandma ever mention letting the neighbors park in her yard?" There was a pause. "Park in her yard? Are you kidding?" "Your grandmother chased a delivery truck driver off her grass with a garden hose once. She would never let people park on her garden." Lisa felt her anger building. "That's what I thought." "Why are you asking?" "Because apparently the HOA has been using her yard as a parking lot for 10 years, and they're not happy that I want them to stop." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Lisa, maybe you should just sell the house. You don't need this kind of trouble." But as Lisa looked at the destruction around her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Her grandmother had been a fighter, someone who stood up for what was right even when it wasn't easy. Maybe it was time for Lisa to find that same strength. "No, Mom," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I think I'm going to stay." That night, Lisa sat on her grandmother's old porch swing, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the evening. Through the trees, she could see the lights of the Willowbrook Heights houses twinkling like stars. They looked peaceful and welcoming from a distance, but Lisa wasn't fooled anymore. She'd seen the real faces behind those polite smiles, and she knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple disagreement about parking. Lisa spent her first week trying to settle into her new life, but the encounter with Robert and the HOA kept nagging at her. Every time she looked out her back window, she could see the tire tracks carved into her grandmother's former garden. It felt like a constant reminder that she was the outsider here. She'd started cleaning up the house, going through her grandmother's belongings, when she found something interesting in the old desk drawer. There was a thick folder labeled Property Documents in her grandmother's careful handwriting. Inside were old surveys, tax records, and what looked like the original deed to the property. Lisa had never paid much attention to legal paperwork before, but something about her conversation with Robert made her want to understand exactly what she owned. She spread the papers out on the kitchen table and started reading. The more she read, the more confused she became. According to the documents, her property was much larger than she'd thought. The survey from 1987 showed boundaries that extended well beyond what she'd assumed was her land. There were measurements and reference points that meant nothing to her, but the map clearly showed her property line extending in directions she hadn't expected. The next morning, Lisa decided to walk her property boundaries to get a better sense of what she actually owned. She started at the front corner of her lot, following the description in the survey. The front boundary was easy enough to figure out. It ran along the main road. But when she started following the side boundary, things got interesting. The survey indicated that her property line ran along what she'd assumed was just a country road leading to the newer houses. But according to the paperwork, the road itself was actually on her land. Lisa walked the length of it, checking the measurements against the survey. Unless she was reading it wrong, she owned not just the road, but several feet on either side of it. This couldn't be right. Lisa went back to the house and called the county office to ask about getting a professional survey done. The woman on the phone was helpful but warned her that it would cost several $100s. "Is there any way to check property boundaries without paying for a full survey?" Lisa asked. "You can come down to the courthouse and look at the records on file," the woman suggested. "Sometimes that's enough to get a general idea." Lisa drove to the county courthouse that afternoon. The clerk in the property records office was a friendly older man who seemed genuinely interested in helping her figure things out. "Let me pull up your property on the computer," he said. typing in Lisa's address. "Oh, this is interesting. Your lot has quite a history." He turned the screen so Lisa could see it. The digital map showed her property in bright yellow, and she could immediately see that her instincts had been right. The road leading to the Willowbrook Heights subdivision was clearly marked as being within her property boundaries. "How is that possible?" Lisa asked. "Those houses have been there for years." The clerk pulled up some additional records. "Looks like your property used to be part of a larger farm. When they subdivided it to build those houses, someone made an assumption about the road access. See, this road was built back in the 1960s when it was all agricultural land. The county maintained it as a public road back then, but it's not public anymore." "Nope. When the farm was sold off in pieces, this section of road went with your grandmother's lot. The developers who built those houses probably assumed they had legal access, but I don't see any easement recorded here." Lisa felt her heart starting to race. "What does that mean exactly?" The clerk looked a little uncomfortable. "Well, technically it means those houses are landlocked except for access across your property. But I'm sure there's some kind of legal arrangement we're just not seeing in these records." Lisa asked for copies of everything, and the clerk printed out a stack of documents for her. On the drive home, her mind was spinning. Could it really be true that she owned the only access road to those expensive houses? That evening, she called a local attorney whose name she'd found online. James Morrison had been practicing property law for 30 years and had good reviews. His secretary scheduled her for an appointment the following afternoon. "Bring all the documents you have," she said. "Mr. Morrison will want to see everything." Lisa spent the rest of the evening going through her grandmother's papers more carefully. In the bottom of the folder, she found something that made her stomach sink. There were several letters from Robert addressed to her grandmother, dating back about 8 years. The first letter was polite, asking if the HOA could occasionally use her backyard for overflow parking during large events. The subsequent letters became increasingly demanding, with Robert writing things like "as discussed" and "per our agreement," even though Lisa could find no record of her grandmother ever agreeing to anything. The final letter, dated just 2 years ago, was the most troubling. Robert had written, "We appreciate your continued cooperation with our parking arrangement. As you know, this benefits the entire community and maintains property values for everyone." Lisa realized that Robert had been pressuring her elderly grandmother for years, probably making her feel like she had no choice but to go along with his demands. The thought made her furious. The next day, Attorney Morrison reviewed all of Lisa's documents while she sat nervously in his office. He was a quiet man who took his time reading through everything carefully. "Well," he said finally, looking up at her over his glasses, "this is quite a situation you've inherited. Is it true that I own the road?" "According to these documents, yes. You own the road and several feet on either side of it. There's no recorded easement giving those houses legal access across your property." Lisa felt a mix of excitement and terror. "What does that mean I can do?" Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Legally, you have the right to control access to your property. You could block the road if you wanted to." But he held up a hand as Lisa started to speak. "There are practical considerations to think about." "Like what?" "Like the fact that those homeowners have been using this access for years without knowing there was a problem. A court might find that they have prescriptive rights to continue using it." Lisa's heart sank. "So they can just keep using my property?" "Not necessarily. Prescriptive easements are complicated and they depend on specific circumstances. The fact that your grandmother may have been coerced into allowing the access could work in your favor. But it would require a legal fight." Morrison explained that she had several options. She could try to work out a formal easement agreement with the HOA. She could fight to block their access entirely, or she could sell her property and walk away from the whole mess. "What would you do?" Lisa asked. Morrison smiled for the first time during their meeting. "That depends on how much you like a good fight and how much you trust your neighbors to be reasonable." Lisa thought about Robert's threatening tone and fake smile. "Not much on both counts." "Then I'd suggest we start by documenting exactly what you own and what rights you have. Knowledge is power in situations like this." Lisa left the attorney's office with a clear plan. She would pay for a professional survey to confirm her property boundaries, and then she would decide how to handle the situation with the HOA. For the first time since moving back, she felt like she had some control over what was happening to her. But that feeling didn't last long. When she got home, there was a letter taped to her front door. It was from the Willowbrook Heights HOA, and it was not friendly. The letter accused her of harassing community members and making baseless legal claims about property ownership. It threatened legal action if she continued to interfere with established community practices. At the bottom, Robert had handwritten a note. Some problems have a way of solving themselves. I hope you'll reconsider your position before things get unpleasant. Lisa read the letter twice, her hands shaking slightly. She'd been naive to think this would be simple. Robert and his HOA weren't going to back down just because she had some old paperwork. They were going to fight, and they clearly thought they could intimidate her into giving up. She looked out at her backyard, where fresh tire tracks from that weekend's HOA event crisscrossed through the remains of her grandmother's garden. For a moment, she considered her mother's advice to just sell the house and walk away. But then she thought about her grandmother, who had spent years being bullied by these people. Lisa folded the threatening letter and put it in her property documents folder. She wasn't going anywhere. Lisa scheduled the professional survey for the following Tuesday. She decided that before she did anything else, she needed to know exactly where her property lines were. The surveyor, a no-nonsense woman named Janet, arrived early in the morning with equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. This shouldn't take more than a few hours, Janet said, unloading her gear. From what you've described, it sounds like a pretty straightforward boundary survey. While Janet worked, Lisa tried to go about her normal routine, but she kept finding herself watching from the windows. She could see Janet setting up markers along what appeared to be the road leading to the Willowbrook Heights houses. Every few minutes, Janet would check her instruments and shake her head, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Around noon, Janet knocked on Lisa's door. I need to show you something, she said, her expression serious. They walked out to the road together. Janet had placed bright orange flags at regular intervals, and Lisa could see that they ran right down the center of the asphalt. Your property line runs exactly where those old survey documents indicated, Janet explained. You own this entire road plus about 8 feet on either side of it. Those houses over there, she pointed toward the subdivision, have no other vehicle access to their properties. Lisa stared at the flags. Seeing the physical markers made it real in a way that paperwork couldn't. Are you sure? Absolutely. I've checked and double-checked. According to every official record I can find, this road belongs to you. The county stopped maintaining it when your grandmother's property was separated from the original farm. The developers who built those houses either didn't do their homework, or they thought they could work out access rights later. Janet packed up her equipment and handed Lisa a thick folder of documentation. You'll have my official report by the end of the week, but I can tell you right now, you've got a very interesting situation here. After Janet left, Lisa stood in her driveway looking at the orange flags. She counted 12 houses that depended on the road for access. 12 families who had probably bought their homes without ever knowing there could be a problem. She was still standing there when Robert's car pulled up. He got out and walked toward her, his face red with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded, gesturing at the survey flags. Getting my property surveyed, Lisa replied, trying to keep her voice calm. You're making a huge mistake, Robert said, stepping closer. Do you have any idea what you're messing with here? Those flags are on public road. Actually, they're not, Lisa said, pulling out Janet's preliminary notes. This road is on my property. It always has been. Robert's face got even redder. That's impossible. We've been using this road for 15 years. You can't just claim ownership of a public road. I'm not claiming anything, Lisa said. I'm simply confirming what my grandmother's deed has always said. This road belongs to me. Robert grabbed the survey notes from her hand before she could stop him. He read through them quickly, his expression changing from anger to something that looked like panic. This is ridiculous, he said. But his voice had lost some of its confidence. Even if this is technically true, you can't just block access to people's homes. There are laws about this. I haven't blocked anything, Lisa pointed out. I'm just trying to understand what I own. Robert handed the papers back to her, but she could see his hands were shaking slightly. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. The HOA is willing to work with you on this. We could formalize the parking arrangement, maybe even pay you a small fee for the use of your backyard. Lisa almost laughed. 2 weeks ago, Robert had threatened her for even questioning the parking arrangement. Now he wanted to pay her for it. "I'm not interested in formalizing anything right now," she said. "I need time to figure out my options." "Your options?" Robert's voice was getting louder again. "Your only option is to be reasonable. You can't hold an entire neighborhood hostage over some technicality." "I'm not holding anyone hostage," Lisa said firmly, "but I'm also not going to be bullied into giving up my property rights." Robert stared at her for a long moment, and Lisa could see him calculating something in his head. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and threatening. "You have no idea what you're getting into. This community doesn't take kindly to troublemakers. We have ways of dealing with people who don't want to cooperate." "Is that a threat?" Lisa asked. "It's a fact," Robert said. "Life can get very unpleasant for people who make problems for their neighbors." He got back in his car and drove away, but Lisa noticed he was careful to stay on the road and not cut across her yard like he usually did. That evening, Lisa called Attorney Morrison to tell him about the survey results. She could hear him whistling softly as she described what Janet had found. "Well, that confirms it," he said. "You own their only access road. This changes everything." "How so?" "Because now you have real leverage. The HOA can't claim this is just about parking anymore. They need access to that road and you control it." Morrison explained that she could demand formal compensation for the years of unauthorized use, or she could work out a permanent easement agreement on her terms. She could also, if she chose, legally block access to the road entirely. "What would happen to those homeowners if I blocked the road?" Lisa asked. "Their property values would plummet," Morrison said bluntly. "Houses without vehicle access are nearly worthless. Some of them might not even be able to get insurance." Lisa felt a knot in her stomach. She didn't want to hurt innocent people, but she also wasn't going to let Robert and the HOA continue taking advantage of her. The next few days were tense. Word about the survey had clearly spread through the subdivision because Lisa started noticing cars driving very slowly past her house. People would slow down and stare at the orange flags, sometimes stopping to take pictures. On Thursday evening, there was a knock at her door. When Lisa opened it, she found a young woman holding a toddler. The woman looked like she'd been crying. "Are you Lisa?" the woman asked. "I'm Jennifer. I live in the blue house at the end of the road." Lisa invited her in, and Jennifer explained that she and her husband had bought their house 3 years ago, using all their savings for the down payment. "We didn't know there could be a problem with the road," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. "Our real estate agent never mentioned anything about access issues. If we can't use the road, we'll lose everything." Lisa felt terrible for Jennifer, but she also realized this was exactly what Robert had been counting on. He'd sent the most sympathetic neighbor he could find to try to guilt Lisa into backing down. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," Lisa said gently, "but I also can't ignore my property rights." Jennifer started crying again. "Robert said you might be willing to work something out. Please, we have a baby. We can't afford to lose our house." Lisa spent an hour talking with Jennifer, explaining that her quarrel was with the HOA's leadership, not with individual homeowners. She promised to consider everyone's situation as she decided what to do. After Jennifer left, Lisa sat on her porch feeling overwhelmed. She'd wanted a quiet life in her grandmother's house, not a legal battle that could destroy people's lives. But every time she considered backing down, she remembered Robert's threats and her grandmother's destroyed garden. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "I heard through the grapevine that you're having some kind of property dispute," her mother said. "Lisa, please tell me you're not getting into a fight with the homeowners association." "It's complicated, Mom." "No, it's not. Just sell the house and move back to the city where you belong. You don't need this stress." But as Lisa looked out at her grandmother's house and the land that had been in her family for decades, she realized something important. She did belong here. This was her home now, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her. "I'm not selling," she told her mother, "and I'm not backing down." That night, Lisa made a decision. She was going to attend the next HOA meeting, whether Robert wanted her there or not. It was time to put all the cards on the table and see who was really willing to be reasonable. Lisa arrived at the community center 15 minutes before the HOA meeting was scheduled to start. She'd spent hours preparing for this moment, organizing her documents and practicing what she wanted to say. Attorney Morrison had offered to come with her, but Lisa wanted to handle this herself first. The meeting room was already half full when she walked in. Conversations stopped as people noticed her, and she could feel dozens of eyes following her as she found a seat in the back. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert was at the front of the room, talking quietly with other board members. When he saw Lisa, his jaw tightened, but he didn't acknowledge her presence. As more residents filed in, Lisa overheard fragments of worried conversations. People were talking about property values, legal costs, and what would happen if they couldn't use the road. She recognized Jennifer sitting a few rows ahead, holding her toddler and looking miserable. Robert called the meeting to order and went through the usual business: budget updates, landscaping plans, and community events. Lisa waited patiently, knowing her moment would come. Finally, Robert reached the end of his prepared agenda. "If there's no other business, we'll adjourn for this month." Lisa stood up. "Actually, there is something I'd like to discuss." The room went silent. Robert's face darkened, but he couldn't very well refuse to let a property owner speak at a public meeting. "This isn't really the appropriate forum for individual property disputes," he said carefully. "This isn't an individual dispute," Lisa replied, walking toward the front of the room. "This affects every homeowner in this subdivision." She'd brought copies of the survey report for everyone, and she started handing them out as she spoke. 3 weeks ago, I had my property professionally surveyed. What we found is that I own the road you all use to access your homes." The room erupted in shocked voices. People grabbed for the survey copies, reading quickly and talking over each other. Lisa heard someone say, "This can't be legal." And another voice ask, "What does this mean for our property values?" Robert banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "This is exactly the kind of fear-mongering I was afraid of," he said loudly. "Ms. Chen is making outrageous claims based on technicalities that have no real legal standing." "Actually," Lisa said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "they have complete legal standing. I've had this confirmed by both the county records office and a property attorney." She explained how the road had originally been part of her grandmother's farm, and how it had never been transferred to public ownership when the subdivision was built. She showed them the chain of title documents and the official survey measurements. "The bottom line is this," Lisa said, looking around the room at the worried faces. "For 15 years, this HOA has been using my property without permission and without compensation. My grandmother was pressured into allowing this, but I'm not my grandmother." Robert jumped up from his seat. "This is extortion. You're trying to hold the entire neighborhood hostage over some ancient paperwork." "I'm not trying to hold anyone hostage," Lisa replied calmly. "I'm simply informing you of the legal reality. You need access across my property, and I have every right to control that access." A man in the third row raised his hand. "What exactly are you asking for?" Lisa had been dreading this question because she still wasn't entirely sure herself. "I'm asking for the HOA to acknowledge my property rights and to work with me on a fair solution. That starts with stopping the unauthorized use of my backyard for parking." "And the road?" someone else called out. "The road is a separate issue that will require a formal legal agreement." Robert was practically vibrating with anger. You can't just demand money from people who bought their homes in good faith. None of us knew there was a problem with the road access. "And I sympathize with that," Lisa said. "But your lack of knowledge doesn't eliminate my property rights. If you'd done proper due diligence before building these houses, this wouldn't be an issue." The room broke into heated discussions. Lisa could see the residents were split between anger at her and anger at the HOA board for not catching this problem years ago. Several people were on their phones, presumably calling real estate agents or attorneys. Jennifer stood up, still holding her baby. "What happens if we can't work something out? Will you block the road?" Lisa looked at the young mother and felt her resolve waver slightly. "I hope it doesn't come to that. But I won't continue to allow unauthorized use of my property either." Robert saw his opening. "There it is," he said triumphantly. "She's threatening to cut off access to your homes unless you pay her whatever she demands. This is exactly the kind of extortion I was warning you about." "It's not extortion," Lisa said firmly. "It's property law. You're welcome to consult your own attorney if you don't believe me." An older woman near the front raised her hand. "Have you considered what a reasonable compensation might be for the road access?" Lisa had been hoping someone would ask this question. Attorney Morrison has researched similar situations. Fair market value for a permanent easement would likely be in the range of $60,000 to $80,000, plus compensation for the years of unauthorized use. The room exploded in angry voices. People were shouting about the unfairness of the situation and demanding to know why the HOA board hadn't protected them from this kind of problem. Robert banged his gavel furiously. "This is ridiculous. We're not paying some opportunistic newcomer $80,000 for the right to use a road we've been using for 15 years. Then you'll need to find another way to access your homes," Lisa said simply. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Board members huddled together in urgent conversation, while residents demanded answers. Lisa stayed long enough to hand out the rest of her survey copies, then quietly left while people were still arguing. On her way out, she overheard one man telling his wife, "We should never have trusted that real estate agent. I knew something seemed too good to be true about the price of these houses." The next few days were intense. Lisa's phone rang constantly with calls from HOA residents, some pleading for mercy and others threatening legal action. She referred everyone to Attorney Morrison and tried to go about her normal routine. On Friday morning, she noticed someone had spray-painted "greedy" across her mailbox. That afternoon, she found her trash cans dumped over and garbage scattered across her driveway. When she went to pick up her mail, the postal worker warned her that someone had been asking questions about her delivery schedule. Lisa called Morrison to report the harassment. "This is escalating faster than I expected," she told him. "Unfortunately, that's pretty common in these situations," Morrison replied. "People get desperate when their property values are threatened. I'd recommend installing some security cameras and documenting everything." That weekend, Lisa drove to the electronics store and bought a basic security system. As she was installing cameras around her property, she noticed Robert's car parked across the street. He was just sitting there watching her. When she waved at him, he drove away quickly. Lisa finished installing the cameras and went back into the house. She was starting to understand that this wasn't just about property rights anymore. It had become a test of wills, and Robert clearly believed he could pressure her into backing down. On Monday morning, Lisa found a formal letter from the HOA's attorney in her mailbox. It threatened to sue her for intentional interference with property rights and demanded that she stop making frivolous claims about road ownership. Lisa read the letter twice, then called Morrison. "They're threatening to sue me for asserting my own property rights."
"Can they do that?"
Morrison chuckled. "They can try, but they won't win. In fact, this letter just proves they're getting desperate. When people resort to legal intimidation tactics, it usually means they know they don't have a strong position. So what do we do now? Now we wait. They'll either come to the table with a reasonable offer, or they'll waste a lot of money on legal fees for a case they can't win. Either way, you hold all the cards here." Lisa hung up feeling more confident than she had in weeks. She'd stood up to the HOA's bullying tactics and established her legal position clearly. Now it was time to see who would blink first. That evening, she sat on her grandmother's porch swing, watching the sun set over the disputed road. For the first time since moving back, she felt like she truly belonged here. This was her land, her home, and her fight to win. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the explosive HOA meeting. Lisa was getting ready for work when she heard shouting outside. She looked out her window to see Robert standing in her driveway, blocking her car with his truck. He was red-faced and gesticulating wildly, clearly furious about something. Lisa grabbed her phone and stepped outside. "Robert, you need to move your truck. I have to get to work." "You're not going anywhere until we settle this," Robert shouted. "I've had enough of your games. The HOA board met last night, and we're prepared to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to." "That's your choice," Lisa said calmly. "But right now you're blocking my driveway and preventing me from leaving my own property." "Good. Maybe now you'll understand how it feels to have someone mess with your rights." Lisa realized that Robert was beyond reason. His face was twisted with anger, and she could see spittle flying as he shouted. She discreetly started recording with her phone. "I'm asking you one more time to move your truck," she said clearly. "Or what? You'll call the cops? Go ahead. I'll tell them all about how you're extorting an entire neighborhood." Lisa did exactly that. She dialed 911 and reported that someone was blocking her driveway and preventing her from leaving her property. The dispatcher said officers would be there within 10 minutes. Robert's attitude changed quickly when he realized Lisa had actually called the police. "You can't be serious," he said, but his voice had lost some of its bluster. "You're trespassing on my property and holding me against my will," Lisa replied. "I'd say that's pretty serious." The police arrived faster than expected. 2 officers listened to both sides of the story, then asked to see Lisa's property documents. After reviewing the survey and deed, they asked Robert to move his truck immediately. "This is ridiculous," Robert protested. "I'm a respected member of this community. She's the one causing all the problems." The older officer looked tired. "Sir, regardless of any property disputes you might have, you can't block someone's driveway. You need to move your vehicle now, or you'll be cited for unlawful imprisonment." Robert moved his truck, but not before shouting at Lisa one more time. "This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started." After Robert left, the officers took a report and gave Lisa a case number. The younger officer pulled her aside as they were leaving. "Ma'am, we've had several calls about disputes in this neighborhood lately. If this escalates any further, you might want to consider getting a restraining order." That afternoon, Lisa called Attorney Morrison to tell him about the incident. "Robert's completely lost it," she said. "I'm starting to worry about what he might do next." "Actually, this might work in our favor," Morrison replied. "His behavior is making it clear that the HOA isn't acting in good faith. I think it's time to turn up the pressure." Morrison explained that they could use Robert's harassment as leverage in negotiations. If the HOA wanted to avoid further legal complications, they'd need to start taking Lisa's position seriously. "What do you have in mind?" Lisa asked. "A formal demand letter. We'll lay out exactly what you're entitled to under the law, and we'll give them 30 days to respond with a reasonable offer. If they refuse, we can file for an injunction to block access to the road entirely." Lisa felt a surge of nervous excitement. "Are you sure that's legal?" "Absolutely. You own the road, and you have every right to control access to it. The only reason you haven't exercised that right so far is goodwill." The demand letter went out the following Monday. It outlined Lisa's legal position clearly, documented the years of unauthorized use, and demanded either fair compensation for a permanent easement or cessation of all access across her property. The reaction was swift and dramatic. By Wednesday, Lisa's phone was ringing constantly with calls from panicked homeowners. Real estate agents were calling to ask about the access situation. Someone even contacted the local newspaper, and a reporter showed up at Lisa's door asking for an interview. Lisa politely declined to speak to the press, but she could see that word was spreading beyond the immediate neighborhood. The story of a small property owner standing up to an entire HOA was exactly the kind of David and Goliath tale that people loved. On Friday, Jennifer came to Lisa's door again, this time without her baby. She looked exhausted and desperate. "Please," Jennifer said. "I know Robert has been awful to you, but the rest of us are just regular people trying to live our lives. Our real estate agent says our house is basically worthless if we don't have guaranteed road access." Lisa invited Jennifer in for coffee. Over the next hour, Jennifer explained that several families were considering bankruptcy if they couldn't resolve the access issue. Young couples with children were looking at losing their life savings. "I feel terrible about what you're going through," Lisa said honestly, "but I can't just give up my rights because the HOA failed to do their homework 15 years ago. What if we got rid of Robert?" Jennifer asked suddenly. "What if the homeowners voted out the entire board and elected people who were willing to work with you reasonably?" Lisa was intrigued by this idea. "Would that be possible?" "I think so. A lot of people are furious that the board let this situation develop. And after Robert's behavior this week, I think we could get enough votes to remove him." They talked for another hour about what a reasonable solution might look like. Lisa explained that she wasn't trying to get rich off the situation, but she also couldn't allow years of unauthorized use to go uncompensated. The following week, Lisa got a call from a woman named Patricia, who introduced herself as the new interim president of the HOA board. "We've voted to remove Robert and his allies from the board," Patricia explained. "We'd like to start over with negotiations if you're willing." Lisa was cautiously optimistic. "What are you proposing?" "We've had the road access situation evaluated by our own attorney. We understand that you have valid legal claims, and we want to work out a fair agreement that protects everyone's interests." They arranged to meet the following Saturday at the community center. This time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of angry shouting, there was a business-like discussion of options and possibilities. Patricia had come prepared with a formal proposal. The HOA would pay Lisa $75,000 for a permanent easement to use the road. They would also pay an additional $15,000 to compensate for the years of unauthorized parking in her backyard. In exchange, Patricia explained, you would grant a formal easement that would run with the properties. guaranteeing access even if ownership changes in the future. Lisa had discussed this scenario with Morrison, and the numbers were fair. But she had one additional condition. I want the HOA to formally acknowledge that my grandmother never gave permission for the parking arrangement, she said. Robert pressured an elderly woman into allowing something she didn't want to allow. Patricia nodded. We can include that in the settlement agreement. A lot of us suspected that was the case. They shook hands on the basic terms, and both sides agreed to have their attorneys work out the final details. 6 weeks later, Lisa sat in Morrison's office signing the final paperwork. The check for $90,000 felt surreal in her hands. What will you do with the money? Morrison asked. Lisa smiled. First, I'm going to restore my grandmother's garden. Then I'm thinking about adding a workshop where I can start that pottery business I've been dreaming about. As they left the attorney's office, Patricia approached Lisa in the parking lot. There's one more thing, Patricia said. The new board would like to invite you to join the HOA as an advisory member. We want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Lisa was surprised by the offer. You want me to join the organization that tried to bully me into giving up my rights? We want you to help us build something better, Patricia replied. You've shown us what can happen when we don't respect people's property rights. We need someone who's willing to stand up and do the right thing, even when it's difficult. Lisa thought about it for a moment. The old her would have said no, would have preferred to avoid any potential conflict, but she'd learned something important over the past few months. All right, she said, but I have some ideas about how the HOA should operate going forward. I was hoping you'd say that, Patricia laughed. A year later, Lisa was tending to her grandmother's restored garden when she heard a car pull into her driveway. It was Jennifer bringing her toddler to see the flowers that were blooming where cars used to park. I never got to properly thank you, Jennifer said as they walked through the garden. I know it seemed like you were making our lives difficult, but you were really just standing up for what was right. Lisa watched Jennifer's daughter toddling between the tomato plants and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what her grandmother would have wanted, a space where things could grow instead of being crushed under the weight of other people's demands. The pottery workshop was almost finished, and Lisa had already started teaching weekend classes for neighborhood kids. The HOA had used some of the money saved from the settlement to build proper community parking, eliminating the need to use anyone's private property. Robert had moved away 6 months after the settlement, unable to handle the social consequences of his behavior. The new HOA board operated with transparency and respect for everyone's rights. As Lisa tucked her grandmother's old garden tools away that evening, she realized something important. She'd come back to this small town looking for a quiet life, but instead she'd found her voice. Sometimes the most important battles were the ones you never expected to fight. And sometimes, when you stood up for what was right, you discovered that other people were waiting for someone to show them how to do the same thing.